I don't know about you, but I remember exactly where I was 18 years ago today, and by today I mean May the 19th, in case you're watching this another day. And that would of course be watching Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, for not only the first time, but also the second, third, and fourth. Yes, I saw it 4 times on the first day alone, and would actually go on to see it a total of 9 times in the theater, 10 if you include the 3D re-release from a few years ago. Anyway, what I'm going to try to do here is give my honest thoughts and review on the movie from then, as best as I can remember anyway, and how they differ from my thoughts on it now, almost 20 years later, and with much more added to the Star Wars universe. Now, the very first time I saw The Phantom Menace, I walked out of the theater underwhelmed. But let me explain. I am, to no one's surprise, a lifelong fan of Star Wars. It's always been more than just a collection of movies to me, but rather a passion of mine. For better or worse, I've lived and breathed Star Wars seemingly my whole life. So when I heard that a new Star Wars movie was on the way, which I believe the news broke in 1997 sometime, though you can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, my excitement and expectations instantly went through the roof for this movie. And I can clearly remember when the first trailer came out, and how that somehow boosted my excitement level even more. I even downloaded it so I could watch it again and again, which took me like 3 or 4 hours and a couple of disconnects on my 56K modem. I really did expect watching a new Star Wars movie to be akin to having some type of amazing religious experience, something that would literally change my life. And then I finally saw the movie, and it didn't change my life. It was, much to my surprise, just a movie. Now, I didn't think it was a bad movie, and unless my memory is hazy, and it might be, there wasn't a lot of hate being thrown at it during that time period. Anyway, like most people, I love Darth Maul, still do, and every time he's on screen, I was a happy camper. And with each subsequent time watching it, I found myself wishing more and more just to get to the end of the movie to see that final duel between Maul, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon again, because it was, and still is, absolutely mesmerizing. Especially the final portion where Qui-Gon has been killed, and it's just Maul and Kenobi. And sure, there's a part of your brain that tells you this is all clearly choreographed. But then another part of your brain tells you how awesome it is to see a lightsaber battle taking place at such speed and with such precision. And that was another part of this movie that I absolutely loved, and still very much do. Getting to see lightsabers wielded by skilled Jedi at the height of their very existence, and even being able to see Yoda and his council, all of that was fantastic. These had been things I'd wondered about and imagined my whole life, and here they were finally being brought on screen. But then there was young Anakin, who I didn't care about at all. Yes, I know this was the kid that was going to become Darth Vader, and I can tell myself that, but a part of me refuses to believe it. And there's always just been this sense of disconnect between this kid that we see in Episode 1 and the Darth Vader we know in the original trilogy. Like my brain refuses to process and rectify that this 9-year-old kid and Darth Vader are one and the same. And I still don't watch The Phantom Menace, even today, and think to myself while watching it that, yup, that's little Darth Vader right there. And that's really part of my problem with The Phantom Menace, both then and still now. It's a very strange way to start the story of Darth Vader. I never needed to see him as a 9-year-old slave boy who had a heart of gold and quotes his mom about the biggest problem in the galaxy being that no one helps each other. In fact, I would have preferred he be a bit older in this movie, roughly the same age as Padme, putting him in his early teens, and have him be this smug little bastard, one who may not have known what those powers he had were exactly, but that he knew he had them and could use them for his own advantage. In fact, why not have Anakin make a deal with Qui-Gon that if he can free him and his mother from slavery, he can win him a race and get him the parts he needs. Then, when Anakin does win, Qui-Gon has to break it to him that he was only able to free him and not his mother. And Anakin gets upset and throws a bit of a tantrum that even ripples through the Force and is felt by Qui-Gon, which is when he really starts to take an interest in him and decides that maybe there's more to this kid than just being Force sensitive. What it would also do is show that Anakin really cares deeply about his mother and sets up how the ones he loves will be used against him later to unleash his anger and turn him to the dark side. And then when we get to Attack of the Clones, Anakin can pretty much be the perfect young Jedi, one that has overcome all that selfishness, anger, and attachment that we saw in Episode 1, instead of how it really goes where he's starting to succumb to all that for seemingly no reason. And then it could instead be Padme who pursues him and not the other way around, and eventually he does fall for her and betrays the Jedi ideals he tried very hard to cling to, which of course opens the door for Palpatine to eventually turn him to the dark side. But I'm getting way ahead of myself, and I'm supposed to be talking about The Phantom Menace. And of course, it's impossible to talk about The Phantom Menace without bringing up Jar Jar Binks. Now, Jar Jar Binks has never bothered me as much as he clearly bothers some people. I actually found him more annoying back in the day when The Phantom Menace first came out, more so than I do now, Maybe because I know he doesn't have much of a role in the next two movies and will eventually end up as a clown on the streets of Theed. Either that, or I'm just become so numb to his stupidity that it doesn't even bother me anymore. And yes, it is simply stupidity that he brings to episode 1. No more, no less. And though some say he needs to be removed from the movies entirely, I'd be okay if they just toned him down a little bit. You can still have him be the bumbling idiot that I guess is supposed to appeal to kids, but he doesn't need to be so over the top with it. Plus, I've always found it so strange that Jar Jar was one of the first all CGI characters in a movie, and that Lucas was so proud of this achievement, but then he takes this monumental achievement of blending a purely computer-generated character into a movie and makes him stick out like a sore thumb by having him act and behave like a straight-up cartoon character. George wanted him to feel real, but then made him act completely unreal. I've never understood that decision. And then we get to the actual story told in The Phantom Menace, and back then, I didn't mind it at all. I know a lot of people hated the politics of the prequels, and they hated hearing about trade negotiations and what made for a legal or illegal blockade of a planet. But to me, again back then, I was fine with it. I figured it was setting up the politics that would lead into the start of the Clone Wars, only it really didn't play out that way. In fact, why the Clone Wars was actually fought is never really touched on in the prequels. I mean, the Separatists wanted to leave the Republic for reasons that are never explained, and the Republic didn't want them to leave for reasons that are also never explained. And the Republic is pondering creating an army, even though they're not even under the impression the Separatists have or will build an army till they found out about the droids on Geonosis. But again, I find myself talking about the wrong movie, and in the near future, I'll give my full thoughts on the Attack of the Clones. But again, going back to the actual story of the Phantom Menace, back then I thought it would really lead somewhere. Today, I realize it really didn't. All it did do, as the name of the movie implies, was let us know that there was indeed a Phantom Menace, that being Palpatine or the Sith themselves, and that he was willing to use his people and homeworld, which was of course Naboo, to further his agenda of taking over the galaxy. Which is cool to see and know about the guy that used to just be the Emperor in the original trilogy, and one of the reasons I like the prequels is because they do expand heavily upon his story, and it's a good story. But I don't know if it warranted a whole movie, or at least not told the way that this one was. Even though yes, I do like The Phantom Menace, the biggest problem with it was it didn't make itself an intricate and crucial part of the overall story. In fact, you could start watching the prequels at episode 2 and not feel like you've missed a whole lot. We're introduced to a very young Anakin who seems like a good-hearted kid, but the next time we see him in Attack of the Clones, he's completely different, with no explanation as to why. Two of the main characters in the movie, and the most loved, Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul, are both killed off. We're introduced to a young queen who isn't a real queen per se, but instead an elected leader who will be a senator when we see her next, and not too much like the regal monarch she was portrayed as in The Phantom Menace. In fact, you could probably convince some people who've seen the movies but aren't real huge fans that she's a different character entirely. Then there's Obi-Wan Kenobi, who wasn't featured at all in The Phantom Menace and took a backseat to his master Qui-Gon, which means we learn very little about him, and nothing that really makes us know the character any better in the subsequent movies. So pretty much the biggest things to take away from The Phantom Menace were that Anakin was apparently the chosen one, spoken about in some prophecy that never ever will get fully explained. That Obi-Wan didn't choose to take on Anakin as an apprentice, but rather it was a pledge made to his dying master. And finally, that Palpatine is one evil bastard that used his own people to propel himself into a position of power to eventually become the Emperor. All that being said, yes, I do enjoy The Phantom Menace, both then and now, but probably more so back in the day when there was a hope that it would one day feel like it had a greater purpose in the grand scheme of things. But that really didn't turn out to be the case. Again, we don't learn much in this movie, and a lot of the characters we're introduced to either die, like Maul and Qui-Gon, are already well known and don't play much of a role, like Yoda and Obi-Wan, or feel like different characters entirely when we see them again, like Anakin and Padme. The highlight of this movie for me always has been and will be Palpatine, getting to see what he was willing to do to come to power, and just how evil and manipulative he could be, and that here was this Sith Lord, hiding in plain sight, chatting it up with the Jedi who were none the wiser. The name of the movie is The Phantom Menace, and for me, it's the Phantom Menace himself, Palpatine, that really makes this a movie I enjoy. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me, how do you feel about The Phantom Menace then, and how do you feel about it now 18 years later? Let me know in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. Also, if you enjoyed this video, check out some of my other ones, or go ahead and subscribe. If you've already done all that, then thanks for your continued support. If you want to know when I upload new videos, hit the notification button, or just follow me on Twitter. And as always, thanks for watching.